Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The courtroom was silent, but charged with palpable tension. Camera flashes crackled, illuminating the tense faces of the jurors and spectators. In the center, Angela Thomas, a 32-year-old nurse, stared straight ahead, her hands clasped in her lap. Her white uniform, so familiar in the hospital corridors, now seemed like useless armor in the face of the accusations. She was accused of killing a baby. Outside, the media were already headlines: Black nurse accused of Lily Parker's murder. Neighbors, colleagues, even patients' families, whispered behind the tinted windows, how could she? Yet Angela knew she was innocent. Her heart pounded, not from fear of prison, but from the injustice that had just befallen her. As the judge banged his gavel, signaling the start of the trial, Angela felt an immense weight on her shoulders. Her life, her reputation, and her freedom were now in the hands of strangers. But she wasn't going to remain silent. One last word, just one, could change the course of everything. The little one, Lily Parker, born premature and fragile, lay in her incubator, surrounded by flashing monitors and the buzzing of medical equipment. Angela Thomas, a dedicated nurse for 10 years, checked the baby's vital signs, adjusted the oxygen flow, and spoke softly to reassure the child. She knew every movement by heart, every heartbeat by intuition. Then, suddenly, the monitor blared a shrill alarm. Lily's heart had stopped beating. Angela immediately called Code Blue, performing the resuscitation procedures with mechanical, panicked precision. The other nurses arrived, but despite their best efforts, the baby did not survive. A few hours later, the drama took an unimaginable turn. The hospital management, after an initial review of the cameras and shift schedules, accused Angela. The words fell like stones: "You are under arrest for the murder of Lily Parker." The shock was total. Angela, stunned, tried to protest, to show the recordings, to explain the medical complications, but her words were lost in the din of accusations. The police officers, impassive, handcuffed her in front of her colleagues and the baby's parents, now inconsolable. Outside, the journalists' cameras were waiting for her. Flashes, shouted questions, murmurs of condemnation even before a verdict was delivered. Angela was led into the police car, her gaze fixed on the hospital, on the place where she had saved so many lives, and where she was now treated like a criminal. In the silence of the vehicle, a thought crossed his mind: I can't let it end like this. The truth has to come out, no matter how long it takes. The court of New Haven seemed colder than ever. The wooden benches creaked under the weight of the spectators, and the air smelled of anguish and fear. Angela Thomas, in a dark suit, entered the room, accompanied by her lawyers. Her heart was pounding, but she forced herself to hold her head high. The trial began with the ruthless prosecutor unfolding his story with calculated precision. He showed CCTV footage, timetables, testimony from colleagues, and the parents' words: she was the last one to approach Lily. He repeated, hammering home Angela's supposed guilt. The defense attorney, Michael Reed, tried to retort. He explained that premature babies were extremely fragile, and that serious incidents could occur despite the best care. He cited medical complications, possible equipment errors, and staff exhaustion. Angela sometimes worked 14 hours straight. But each argument seemed to be met with anger and sadness visible in the audience. The testimonies came thick and fast. Some colleagues spoke of suspicious behavior and unusual gestures, but nothing concrete. The defense's medical experts insisted on the absence of direct evidence. No criminal act had been recorded, no motive, no trace of violence. Despite everything, the media pressure was immense. The newspapers headlined, "The nurse who killed Lily." Her parents, consumed by grief, stared at Angela with eyes filled with hatred and grief. Even colleagues who had admired her for years could not hide their doubts, influenced by fear and prejudice. Angela listened silently to every accusation, every whisper. She knew she was a victim of a system that judged her more for the color of her skin than for the facts. And deep inside her, one conviction burned: the truth had to come out, whatever the cost. As the hearings progressed, it became clear that Angela Thomas's trial was based not only on medical facts, but also on deep-rooted prejudices in the courtroom. Every gesture, every look of the black nurse was scrutinized, interpreted as suspicious. The murmurs of the jurors and the audience seemed to weigh more heavily than any tangible evidence. Some witnesses mentioned trivial details: she seemed nervous, she didn't smile enough, her tone of voice was cold. These subjective observations, never supported by facts, were turned into evidence against her. Angela, accustomed to being respected for her competence, found herself judged for her skin color and her calm in the face of tragedy. The prosecutor skillfully exploited these biases. He punctuated his sentences with implicit remarks: "Have you seen how she's acting? Can you really trust someone who seems so detached?" Every word was a trap, every question a disguised accusation. The media, hungry for sensationalism, amplified the injustice. Headlines spoke not of the fragility of a premature baby or the medical risks, but of Angela's suspicious coldness. In the online comments, hatred poured forth. Some no longer saw a dedicated nurse, but a suspected criminal, simply because she was black. For Angela, every day in court was a fight against injustice and stereotypes. But despite the fear, the fatigue, and the weight of the entire world on her shoulders, she remained silent and determined. She knew that the truth would eventually come out, and that his last word could change everything. After weeks of testimonies, pleadings, and medical expertise, the dreaded moment arrived. The verdict. The courtroom was filled with an almost oppressive silence. Lily Parker's parents' eyes were fixed on Angela, full of pain and anger. The jurors, for their part, seemed to carry on their shoulders the responsibility for an entire shattered life. The judge stood up. In a deep voice, he announced, "We have reviewed all the evidence and heard all the testimony. We believe that Angela Thomas is guilty of the murder of Lily Parker." A murmur rippled through the room. Angela felt her world crumble. Tears welled up, but she held them back, clenching her fists on her knees. Her gaze, once gentle and reassuring, turned resolute and cold. The sentence was then pronounced: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The words fell like stones in her chest. Her loved ones burst into tears. Her colleagues stood frozen in disbelief. Angela was escorted from the room, each step weighing like an additional condemnation. In the vehicle that took her to prison, fear was not her dominant feeling. It was anger against injustice, frustration at the prejudice and latent racism that had shaped his trial. A single thought burned in his mind: "I must speak. My last word will be the key. The world must know the truth." The weight of injustice weighed on her, but a spark of courage ignited. Even in the darkness of this condemnation, Angela knew that a single word, at the right time, could change everything. The silence in the courtroom was almost unbearable. All eyes were on Angela Thomas. The judge, overcome by the emotion of the moment, signaled to the nurse. It was his last word. Angela stood up slowly. Each step echoed on the marble floor, the weight of her innocence and dignity. She took a deep breath, and in a clear but serious voice, she spoke. "I am innocent. I never hurt Lily Parker. And I want the world to know that the one who is truly responsible is among you." A murmur rippled through the room. Lily's parents exchanged confused glances in shock. The prosecutor frowned, confused. Some of the jurors whispered among themselves, unsure of what Angela had just said. The judge, his eyes wide, asked, "Explain yourself." Angela couldn't elaborate here and now, but her last word had lit a spark of doubt. Surveillance cameras and medical reports, which had been partially ignored, were re-examined. Every gesture, every detail was analyzed with new attention, and a long-hidden truth began to emerge: another staff member had handled the baby's medical equipment. At that precise moment, the court understood that Angela's conviction was based on prejudices, assumptions, and unfair haste. The murmur in the room turned into agitation. Injustice had just been brought to light. Angela, standing with her eyes fixed on the judge, felt an invisible weight lift from her shoulders. Her courage and her word had created the beginning of the truth and justice. Shortly after Angela's last word, the court ordered in-depth internal investigation. The video recordings, which had been partially analyzed until then, were scrutinized. Experts examined every movement, every gesture, every interaction in the neonatal unit. As the jurors and audience held their breath, a crucial detail was discovered. In a poorly lit sequence, another medical staff member was handling the baby's oxygen moments before the fatal alarm. This gesture, which went unnoticed during the initial investigation, was the actual cause of Lily Parker's death. The prosecutor, forced to review the evidence, was left speechless. The truth came to light: Angela had no responsibility in the child's death. She had been convicted not of a criminal act, but of prejudices and errors of judgment which had eclipsed reality. In the weeks that followed, the news made headlines: nurse innocent after unjust conviction, injustice revealed through a courageous last word. Angela, now freed, regained her freedom, but her fight was not over. She had to rebuild her life, her reputation, and her faith in a system that had betrayed her. This development shocked the medical community and society as a whole. The lessons of this trial went far beyond the case of a baby. They highlighted latent racism, prejudice, and the importance of vigilance in the face of injustice. After 3 years of judicial nightmare, Angela Thomas finally walked through the prison gates. The fresh air seemed to cleanse her mind and revive her inner strength. The reporters were there, but this time their words carried admiration rather than accusation. Angela Thomas, the wrongfully convicted nurse, is free. Upon her return to the medical community, Angela was greeted with a mixture of respect and guilt. Her former colleagues, who had doubted her, apologized, acknowledging the errors and biases that had led to her conviction. The New Haven Hospital was forced to review its procedures and initiate training against racism and institutional bias. Angela, for her part, chose not to harbor any grudges. She knew that her true mission went beyond her own liberation. She created associations supporting healthcare professionals who are victims of injustice and became a recognized speaker for raising public and institutional awareness of racial prejudice and miscarriages of justice. Life slowly returned to normal. Angela resumed her role as nurse, this time with renewed authority and confidence. Every gesture towards the babies now carried a silent message: the truth always comes out in the end, and courage is its key. His story inspired dozens of professionals to speak out against injustice and fight against discrimination, transforming what could have been a personal tragedy into a national symbol of resilience and justice restored. Released and rehabilitated, Angela Thomas didn't want her experience to remain a simple personal account. She quickly realized that her struggle was much broader. She had to protect those who, like her, could be victims of prejudice and injustice. She founded the initiative, Truth and Justice, an organization dedicated to supporting healthcare professionals facing unfair accusations, combating institutional racism, and reforming legal procedures in medical cases. Angela traveled the country giving lectures, sharing her experience and showing how a final word, a gesture of courage or a firm voice could change the course of a life. She met with families, judges, and medical students, sharing her message: never be intimidated by prejudice, and always stand up for the truth. Her fame grew quickly. The media dubbed her the nurse who challenged injustice, and her speeches inspired reforms in several hospitals and courts. Laws were proposed to ensure that evidence and racial biases are better examined before any conviction. But Angela didn't stop there. She visited prisons, schools, and hospitals in disadvantaged neighborhoods, using her own story to teach resilience, vigilance, and moral courage. Every smile from a young nurse or a family she helped reinforced her conviction. Her fight had a real impact. Angela Thomas was now much more than a nurse. She had become a living symbol of justice, hope, and courage. And in every courtroom or hospital where injustices occurred, his name was a reminder that the truth always triumphs in the end. Within a few years of her release, Angela Thomas had become a key figure in the fight against injustice and institutional racism. She was invited to international conferences, prestigious hospitals and universities opened their doors to her, and her story inspired concrete reforms in the judicial and medical systems. The New Haven Hospital, where he was once sentenced, officially paid tribute to him. A training room was dedicated in his name, intended to raise awareness among healthcare professionals about unconscious bias and justice in the medical field. Angela, moved, gave a speech in front of the young nurses and doctors. Every life we touch, every patient we treat, deserves our fairness and vigilance. What I have experienced has shown me that even one person can bring about immense change if they never give in to injustice. Newspapers, television channels, and digital platforms now recounted her story not as that of an accused, but as that of a modern heroine, a symbol of courage and resilience. Young black women in the medical field cited her as a role model, inspired by her strength and determination. But what was most important to Angela was the concrete impact of her actions. Procedures for verifying evidence in cases of medical death were strengthened, programs to raise awareness of racial bias multiplied, and many lives were protected thanks to these reforms. Angela understood that her struggle was not limited to her own story. She had created a lasting legacy, a light in the darkness for those who might one day face unjust accusations. Her voice, courage, and resilience paved the way for a more just world for all. Angela Thomas stood before a packed room at an international conference on justice and medicine, looking into the attentive faces of the attendees. Her journey had spanned the worst of human injustice, and today it inspired thousands of people around the world. She spoke. "I was accused of a crime I didn't commit. I was tried, convicted, and deprived of my freedom, not for my actions, but for the prejudices and assumptions of those who didn't know me. But I survived. And my survival wasn't just about me, it opened the eyes of many, and it began to change lives." Applause echoed through the room. But Angela wasn't looking for fame, she wanted to convey a universal message. If you witness an injustice, if you feel that someone is being wrongly judged, never look away. Sometimes one word, one act of courage, or simply the right truth spoken at the right time can change the course of an entire life. Don't be afraid to stand up for what's right, even when the world seems against you. Journalists immortalized every word. Schools, hospitals, and courts used her speeches as training material. Angela had transformed her pain into strength, her injustice into a lever for change. And as she left the stage, surrounded by inspired and grateful young professionals, she knew her story would never truly end. She would live on. In every voice that fights for truth, every action that stands for justice, and every life it has helped to protect. Angela Thomas, once wrongly accused, was now a symbol of resilience, courage, and hope to the world.